Hi, you're here sewing with Cody. In today's video, we are using the bernette b77, but this also applies to the bernette b79. And we're going to be talking about pattern begin and pattern end. So pattern end is essentially if, in this case, we're sewing a row of hearts, or any decorative stitch really, and we're stitching along, we have our row of hearts, and we want to stop at a particular location, but we want to finish that pattern before we stop, so we don't have an incomplete pattern like we have here. So we've got all the hearts, and then it just stops with a half of a stitched heart. No, we want to finish that particular heart. We don't want an incomplete heart, and we don't want it to start into the next pattern. So to do so, what we'll do is we'll start stitching. So if we start stitching our heart, and you'll see it on the screen where it's stitching. Now let's say if we come to this one, we want this to be our last heart. While we're stitching, we'll hit this icon. And if you notice, it's stopped all by itself, and my foot is still on the foot pedal. So the key with using this icon, which one, we've seen this icon before, this icon also is our tie-off icon. So when we want to use this icon as pattern end, we have to click it while we are sewing the last pattern we want to sew. So we can't click it before. We can't stitch halfway through the pattern and stop and then click it. We actually have to click it while our foot is on the foot pedal. That's it. So watch when we click it, we'll see down here, we see the pattern end button appear. That's the only time it will appear is while we're in the act of sewing. And you see it stops all by itself. So that's what makes this button kind of multi-purpose. So tie it off, but it'll also end that pattern. So the other end of the pattern end is pattern begin. So pattern begin will, if we stopped with a half-stitched pattern and we start stitching somewhere else, we don't want to start stitching the rest of that half-stitched pattern. We want to start all over from the beginning of that pattern. Now, within saying that, if we were stitching, so we'll pause there for a second. This is our pattern begin icon. So if we were to start sewing again in a different direction, and we wanted to start from the beginning of that heart, if we click that, you'll see it starts from the beginning. But the point I was going to before I got sidetracked is if we stop here, and if we use our thread cutter, the machine knows, okay, they finished that pattern, they finished sewing, so they're going to start sewing it again, so they're going to want to start from the beginning. And so it automatically moves it to the beginning. Not all machines do that when using a thread cutter, but with the bernette b77 and 79, that is another form of pattern end and pattern begin in a sense. So well, I guess it really doesn't end it. It just will start it over again once it's finished cutting. So you could either use the pattern begin icon that appears here, or if you are using your thread cutter, because not every time you're going to want to use your thread cutter, or that the application you're working with, you can use your thread cutter. That's another way to start the pattern all over again when you start sewing again. All right, hopefully that makes some sense with the pattern begin and pattern end with your sewing, so you can get complete decorative stitches without having half-stitched patterns. All right, well, happy sewing.